This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 153. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And welcome back, my freeheeling friends. We're into the winter. So great to be back in the shop for a couple weeks now, and we're starting to see the tempo pick up. It was nice to be there the last couple days with Taylor and seeing people actually walk in their ski gear, obviously coming off the hill, lots of smiles and some good coverage here. So I hope wherever you are at, you are also experiencing the same thing with some good snow starting to fall and getting a little bit of that base made up so that we've got a good start going into November. So newsroom and notes. We've been running kind of a leaner schedule the last couple weeks. Only open Thursday, Friday, Saturday. This week we are going to be adding Wednesday as well. So we'll be open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, noon until 7 p.m. Saturday, 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. So be sure if you're in the area to check the times before you roll on by. If you need a specific appointment outside of that, email customer service at freeheellife.com and we will line up a time to meet with you, whether you're trying to drop off service or if you need to get a hold of us. That's another great way for any of the orders. And we'll be there working Monday through Saturday, just only open in the retail space Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at those times that I mentioned. So thanks for the support thus far. It's great to kick off the season, and we are looking forward to another great one. Year number 8 is off to a great start, and we couldn't do it without you. So thanks for listening to the podcast and supporting Freeheel Life, our brand, our retail shop, and everything that we do. It is much, much appreciated. Couple product call outs, just so you know what we've got rolling right now. We're stocked up with Volet skis. We've got plenty of Outlaw X NTN bindings, both in large and small. Majo, I think we actually sold out of the black ones, but we've got Majo 3.0 in the red original colors available. All the Volet bindings, tons of new merchandise, and excited to have a nice fully stocked shop. We've talked a little bit about boots. There's been some supply chain issues with Scarpa this year, which is the primary boot line that we sell. And we're still waiting on getting an exact date for those. But we have it confirmed that we're going to be the first place to get them in North America. So when we know, you will know. And we're going to try to make that happen as soon as possible. So we've talked about a little bit in the past. If you're looking to, switch over and you need a new setup, don't hold off on the boots. Get a hold of us. Come into the shop. Let's get you lined up and get you in the queue for the boots, because once they do show up, they're going to start going like hotcakes. So please let us know ahead of time and kind of get it on the radar with us. And then we'll get the boot and getting the skis and the bindings lined up ahead of time and get rolling what we can. We're also going to be having the kids rentals, season rentals going live this week. Miles has been working hard on that project to get everything queued up so that we can get those out the door for your young freeheelers, which has always been something super important to us as well. And other than that, we're going to be getting rentals ready for when the resorts open as well towards late November. So you'll be able to demo Protector 95s, Protector 105s, along with some other setups. Generally, we've got Volet. Basically, whatever we sell in the shop, we're going to have lined up for trying on the slopes. So be thinking about that as well, whether you're getting into Telemark and kind of need some guidance there and maybe a rental. Or if you're looking at trying new equipment and you're not quite sure you want to get on it until you can try it, that's another great option as well. On the Bluebird day gear side of the house, heel levers are at anodization right now. We've got a ton of those over there. That's kind of the last process before we package them up. and start sending them out. So we should have enough to get in some shops that have worked with us in the past. And we'll let you know what shops to go check out to be able to find those, as well as the leashes and smile plates. So we're trekking along with that as well, and going to be getting those out the door sooner than later in case you are one of those customers that's been looking for those. And especially the heel levers, because as a lot of the nylon and plastic ones have been breaking and there's not as many used options on the market, definitely that universal heel throw is going to be a great product for you out there. So we'll keep you in the mix with all of that, and looking forward to getting those completed. So today I'm bringing back my good friend Craig Dostie, and it was we took a little break over the summer, and I thought it was time to bring the man, the myth, the legend back on the podcast and just kind of get things rolling, get the blood flowing. We're going to be putting out, I think this week will be the first Dostie's View for the season on our YouTube channel. So if you like watching Dostie yell at kids on the lawn and no, I'm just kidding. But there's a couple funny little clips that people always bring up where he's like yelling at an airplane or something. And he's back on. We're going to be talking we have a really cool conversation, kind of getting into some preseason prep that he was doing. Also, most of the conversation, we really, really get deep on bindings again. What's going on in the DIY world, where a lot of these do-it-yourselfer binding people on the internet and around the globe are making some cool innovations on their own and definitely getting the wheels turning for many of us out there. And we kind of break that down, what's new, what things are working, and then kind of where bindings are going to be heading in the future, in our opinion. And I definitely dig in a little bit with talking about what I did in this past video I did on YouTube a week ago in terms of research and development and what drives that, and what I would like to see in terms of some of those binding options in the future that I think would actually solve a lot of the problems. So heads up that this is a deep nerd gear talk with lots of Telemark language that you may or may not know. So, but it is a conversation that everyone is welcome to listen to, but I always like to let people know ahead of time before the gear stuff, because that may not be your cup of tea. But Craig is, for those of you that don't know him, we've had him he's a regular guest on the podcast. He was the owner and publisher of Coular magazine. He's been around Telemark for over 40 years, since it kind of came back onto the scene in the late 70s, and has been a huge proponent in the media of helping all of us know more about equipment and what's working, what's not, what could be improved, and generally just getting our stoke at a high level. And then when Backcountry Magazine took over Coular, he's done a bunch of work with the gear testing for the Backcountry Gear Guide over the years, and is just an all-around good dude, a good friend of mine, and I'm always happy to talk to him. So that's Craig in a nutshell, and I all hope you enjoy the conversation this Monday with Craig Dostie. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, Mr. Dostie, what's up, bro?
Hey, it's good to catch up again, Josh. And looking forward to making some turns this season.
Yeah, but what?
Well, I'm planning on a late start to my season.
You surprised me when you texted me like the other day, and you're like, I just made like 10,000 Telemark turns, and I was like, what? I was like, you went. Yeah. I'm like, you went out in this. I'm like, that doesn't seem like you, but okay. And then I was like, I bet he's talking about ice skating, which is
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Exactly. See, now it's all making sense.
And it was pretty funny. I was accosted
Accosted, really? At the ice rink?
Yeah. So I went up to Fort Collins, Edora, Aquatic and Ice Center. They have 2 rinks there, and they have a 50-meter pool. So I like going there when they have the 50-meter pool, but they don't have it that often anymore because it's a much harder workout. If you swim, whatever distance you swim, when you swim, if you're a regular swimmer, you're going to make flip turns, right? In 100 yards, you'll make 3 flip turns on a standard 25-yard pool. But on a 50-meter pool, you'll make 1 flip turn to do 100 yards, actually 100 meters. And so 1, it's longer, and 2, you get 1/3 as many rests. So the flip turn is kind of like a little pause. It's a little break. It's a rest. And it's amazing how that lack of flip turns, 1/3 as many, really makes it a much harder workout. Anyway, I was there not so much for swimming, but I wanted to go ice. I wanted to tune up my telly. So I wanted to follow, what Dostie says to do and go practice your telly turn on ice. And so I've learned that I can't really open it up and do what I want to do when the rink is full of average ice skaters, because they're just, cruising around. They're not very good, and I have to be very careful not to run into anybody. And I always am. I'm very careful, right? So I go when they had, what was it called? Fitness skating. So I called them. I said, "What's this fitness skating?" "Well, it's just, it's like it's more advanced skaters." I was like, "Cool. That's exactly what I want. People who can go at my speed, and I don't, have to be worried about intimidating them when I'm doing my slash back and forth, right?"
Okay.
So there's 8 people on the ice, and 2 of them are gals who got coaches, and so they're learning how to do spins and twists and I forget what you call it when you kick up in the air and you do a spin. So they were learning that, and then there was 3 other people on the ice and myself. And one of them was a guy who had an artificial foot. It was like, man, good on you, dude.
Wow. That's impressive.
Out here ice skating. And then one gal was, you could tell she wanted to be a better skater. She wasn't quite there. And then there was this one guy who was obviously a good figure skater, but he wasn't doing super advanced stuff. Anyway, I'm doing my backwards skating and cutting left and cutting right. And he got on my case. He said that I was getting in people's way, and they were paying good money for coaching. I was like, no, like I've been watching out. I mean, even though I'm skating backwards, I'm making sure I'm keeping away from people. And it dawned on me later what he didn't like. When I do that backwards scissor and I'm making the telemark move, I am chewing up the ice.
Oh, see? Watch out.
And so I don't think he was just using the fact that he said I was intimidating the other skaters, which I was not, and I was staying away from them. But he didn't want to say, "You're messing up the ice, dude," because that would have been, kind of a wimpy reason. But that's the only reason I can see is he didn't like the fact that I was leaving really big ruts in the ice.
He was definitely an alpine skier, and he definitely was also the Zamboni driver. That's my prognosis on.
Yeah, something like that. So, and he even said, "I hope you don't come back."
Wow, that's legit. Yeah. Good job, Dostie.
Yeah,
still making it happen out there.
Right. And so when he told me that, I was kind of like, I need to make sure I come back here more often. I didn't say that to him, but that's my goal, because I need to practice my telly turns because I'm going to make a late entrance on snow. And the main reason I'm planning on making a late entrance on the snow is because it's never that good early season, unless we get some really big storms, which we could. I mean, I reserve the right to change my mind. If we get a really big storm, if we get a 3-footer here in Colorado, I'll be out there for sure.
Yeah, but we got like 20 in this last storm in Salt Lake, and I mean, same. What's crazy is that there was so many skiers out hiking in the Cottonwoods that, from what I could tell, there was already a red snake. Meaning for those that aren't familiar with the red snake, it's basically like your taillights, the color of the taillights, like, traffic coming down the canyon. It was that busy. People were sliding off the road. It was kind of crazy, but it did come in as our friend Craig Gordon from the UAC, Utah Avalanche Forecast, said it is setting up to be a designer snowpack. So it came in wet and heavy on the bottom with some
good.
Nice light stuff on top. So assuming it stays snowing, that it could be a good start for the backcountry year, which is nice because once you get that early snow and then it sticks around for too long, that's usually where we start to get into trouble out here. Much like you guys out in Colorado.
What was the term you used?
Designer snowpack.
Designer snowpack. Yeah. I mean, personally, I consider that California snowpack then to be designer snowpack because what I like about it, the first storm comes in like spackle. It's just heavy and wet and just goo, but it covers everything. So all the obstacles that are on the bottom, they're covered with this, dense snow. So you don't hit anything. What usually comes in Colorado is really light and then it goes rotten. And, you got to have 3 or 4 feet because otherwise, if you've only got 20 inches or 2 feet here, you'll just sink right to the bottom and you'll hit all the rocks, all the twigs, all the branches, all the roots. That's part of why I don't like early season skiing here.
Yeah. And I think he probably's, and I agree, like it's kind of that more like that maritime snowpack when you have more moisture in it. I think part of it here too is, and I'm obviously not a certified avalanche forecaster by any means, but I think what usually happens out here a lot of years, you'll get that early snow in October and then it just sits for a really long time and starts to create kind of that faceted snow layer against the ground. And this is set up nicely. We could call it California, which is sort of synonymous with designer, right? Like California, like it's very, we'll call it Gucci snow and just call it good,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you guys got spackle to start with. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I was working at the shop today and it was crazy. I mean, I had at least 2 customers I helped that walked in their ski clothes. Like it was on. I mean, one gentleman was up hiking at Snowbird because I think they're still letting uphill traffic at some of the areas. And then I had one customer, and she is a ski instructor at Brighton, and so they were up there skiing around. She said it wasn't like out of this world skiing, but there's coverage, and I don't know, they might even ran the lifts for the instructors. They were up there getting it done. And total side note, I got to tell you this. So that the instructor, I had forgotten. I have this pair of old skis. I don't know if I've ever. I might have showed you these, but maybe not. But I thought you'd appreciate this while I'm thinking about it. Is they were gifted to when we started doing the collection, kind of for the museum. This pair of skis came in, and they're so unique that I haven't had time to put them anywhere in the shop because we kind of ran out of space on the ceiling, and they're so cool that they're just sitting in the office, like in the back room, because I've been like, who gave these to us? Because there's a note from when it turned out it was her that gave these to me, but I had forgotten who gifted them to us because I didn't put a name on it, unfortunately. So they've been sitting here for like 5 years, and there's this note talking about, hey, these are my dad's, these were my father's skis, and he had passed away, and she knew that we collected old Telemark gear, and I was so stoked that I figured out who it was, because I want to have her come on and do a little history video with me about them, because her father was I think he was a early computer science guy, and had done that, but he loved to invent things. And so somewhere along the line, he decided he came to his family. She vividly remembers him saying, "Hey, I want to go to Norway and learn how to telemark ski." Just like out of the blue.
Oh, wow.
So this guy goes, her father goes to Norway, learns how to telemark somewhere, comes back, and he had, this must have these skis are old, and you can probably help me date them from the bindings I'm about to explain. But he comes home and he's immediately on the search for a releasable binding. And and because he like broke his hip or something alpine skiing, like there was something that like he's like, I need something safer, you know. So this old I should have looked at them. There's like an old pair of Rosignol alpine skis. They're pretty wide and pretty beefy, but he had taken a is it Spademan? No. Oh man, now I'm blank.
Yeah, could be Spademan.
Spademan bindings, which has a long spring on the front. That sounds familiar?
Yeah, and just and is it Spademan? No. I was going to mix up something else because the original Volet releasable binding, the complete releasable binding, was built off of the concept of the Besser.
Yeah, the
binding.
Besser. Exact. It looks like the Besser binding.
Okay.
But it's like it's like more of like a metal, almost kind of looks like a trampoline spring, kind of like, which is Spademan, I guess. Anyways, so what he had done is took this Alpine Spademan binding so if you imagine almost like it looks like a heavy duty silver spring in the front, but it lifts upward.
Yep, that's a Spademan.
And it releases sort of like the toe piece side to side. So it opens up almost like the side of where this Alpine boot would go. It opens up and it's some sort of releasability. So not only did she leave the skis with the Spademan binding on it, but she left I think they're a pair of Vask boots, if I remember. Vask made these Telemark boots back in the day. They're kind of cool. They're like a lot of those early leather boots, but they're typically brown, which I always thought was kind of cool. And he had mounted a metal toe plate to the bottom of his 75 millimeter toe that corresponded with the Spademan. And then he had a releasable, kind of like a releasable 3-pin, but it didn't have pins, I guess. And it just has this like metal toe plate on it.
Yeah, kind of like a Cubco binding. He mounted that thing to the sole of his boot.
Yep.
So it was only good if he was skiing.
Yeah, it's kind of funky if you're walking around.
You wouldn't. I mean, I remember my very first pair of not very first. My very first pair of releasable ski bindings that were not cable bindings were Cubcos, and you put these not inserts, these plates on your toe and your heel, and you stepped in. And the toe released not 360 degrees because it couldn't release down, but the top hemisphere. I mean, it released in any direction on the toe, not just left and right, but up as well. Okay, so the whole hemisphere released in the front, and then the heel only released up. But the combination, it was actually a pretty good releasable system. The problem was when you were walking on the boots in the parking lot in Michigan, which is usually boilerplate ice, you were just sliding all over the place on these metal inserts that you bolted onto your sole at the toe and the heel.
Yeah, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, the boots are more like a tap shoe. Like if you're like tap dancing or something, it's like it's like a legit metal plate on the 75 millimeter toe, which is pretty cool. But anyways,
well, he got release.
Yeah. Anyways,
hopefully.
Yeah, I thought you'd appreciate that Spademan releasable binding for a leather boot. Pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. And you know what? I remember having discussions with other people in the 90s about how to make a releasable telemark binding. And the concept of the Spademan came up quite a bit.
Huh. That's it. Because that would have been the time. So, yeah. And that kind of reminds me, like, bringing up the Besser. Because we were talking about the Besser binding today. And actually, we're showing her, hey, check out the Vole CRB. And we were explaining how the Besser binding worked, which was essentially that same cylindrical release system on the front. But it had like the Alpine version had like a plate underneath it that went to the heel that I don't know if it like came on. Did it like come off on your foot or something? It must have come off on your foot.
Well, yeah, so it's like you snapped into the plate and then the plate would release at the toe or the heel. But the other thing about the Besser is it had wires, right? So when it released, they hadn't come up with ski brakes at the time. And
the old nunchucks.
It would release from the ski, but these wires would keep it retained, and you could just lift your foot, and as long as you could shake the snow off, the ski wasn't in the snow, it would snap back in.
Yeah, I will say I have a fond memory of having a pair of releasable Vole CRBs in the 90s, and I had. You brought up that they might have had the brakes, but I didn't realize that there were brakes. And so I had the calf leash and this is what I always laughed about in hindsight. Cause I remember distinctly crashing in moguls and my foot pops out and the binding's on my foot because that's how the CRB would release. But then it was like, I had like feet nunchucks because the leash that went to my leg attaches to the binding still, and so your ski doesn't run away, but then you end up, if you're yard sailing hardcore and you double eject like I did, now you've got flapping skis just like hacking you apart. It's like, I never understood that part because it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but.
Well, it was a known potential consequence.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well,
which is why ski brakes were developed, because that was the problem with leashes.
I always think talking to you how many versions of releasable systems that have come and gone, because it was always like the holy grail of telemark bindings. It has to release. And then there's so many weird versions of stuff that have come along, like Rotofella TRP, Vole CRB. Let's see, what else is Skyhoy?
The Skyhoy.
Classic.
Yeah. Yeah. And the TRP actually was really good.
Yeah, that was a good one. It was like slick too, like it was tight. Like it didn't it was like under the binding and kind of actually made sense.
It was under the binding, and the other thing is it didn't pre-release like the CRB did.
Yep. Yeah,
that was the problem with the CRB, is it tended to pre-released a lot with plastic boots. Not so much with leather, but the reason it pre-released with plastic is, you got, after you do whatever 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 telemark turns, the duckbill would basically get this permanent rocker where it was lifted, right? And that's where the concept of wedges came in, was to minimize the effect of the rocker, because the problem with the rocker was, you got your duckbill clamped down flat, but it's got rocker in it, so it lifts your heel. So whenever you made a transition between turns, it would automatically, there's this natural spring tension to unweight your heel, and you had to counteract it in the turn. But if you weren't using wedges to kind of minimize that rocker effect, in the CRB, the problem is there was always this constant upward tension, especially as when your heel is flat, when it's the front ski. And then that basically provided tension to the release system so that it didn't take much, because it was already pre-tensioned towards release with that upward pressure, to release sideways. And so with plastic boots, the CRB released way too easy, and they discontinued the CRB because of that pre-release. And when they realized it was the rocker, they built in a little bit of a wedge on the CRB. But by the time they got around to doing that, the reputation of the CRB being a pre-release releasable binding was pretty firmly entrenched in the Telemark community, and so people stopped buying it. And even though they had, quote, fixed it.
I will say there is a strong CRB market still. That's is
good.
Yeah, there's a group that I'm sure people are listening and they're like, I rock the CRB, because when people find them, they buy them, which is, yeah. And there's lots of variations of them for sure.
Right. And if you got plastic boots, you just want one of the later versions, because they corrected that flaw.
Yeah, the wedge. I love it.
Yeah.
We talked about some guys from Idaho came in here years ago and they called it boot jack.
Yeah.
the boot jack. All right. Well, okay. So that's some old stuff. I mean, I'm curious, because this leads into a good topic that I was curious about, because you're always finger on the pulse of all these DIY guys out there. And, I'm kind of curious, what's the latest in the do-it-yourself binding modification world? Have you seen anything new? Tell me. I
haven't seen it, but I've heard some talk. I mean, the reality is the Michael bolt-on duck butt, to me, honestly, is the biggest revolution in DIY Telemark. Because
explain what that is. For those that don't get the joke about Michael Bolt-on, just type in Michael Bolton.
Yeah.
But explain to people what it is and why it's so interesting.
Well, basically, Bobby Tuso, who goes by the handle Bobby Too Slow, and from what I've been able to determine, he's he likes doing rando races in telegear, so he's not slow. It's just kind of a play on words with his last name, Tuso. But he's not slow, as far as I can tell. I've never skied with him. But anyway, he saw early on that, and this is, I think it's almost 4 years ago now. It might even be 5. But he saw that the way Garmont did their second heel is they just riveted on, an adapter. And
that was replaceable, which is also very cool that no one's done again yet. So
yeah.
So if it gets chewed up, you could actually replace it, which was pretty cool.
You can replace it, right? So actually, no, it wasn't riveted. It was bolted on. They screwed it into T-nuts, okay? And then they changed the mold on all their Telemark boots. So if you look at even a 75 millimeter boot, you'll see that there's like a little platform where you could add a duck butt from an NTN boot.
On a 75 boot?
Yeah, that platform is there even on a 75 millimeter boot.
Oh, interesting.
From Scott.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, just look more closely, okay? So when they made that mold change for the Prophet, they made the mold change for a bunch of other boots too, just to make it kind of universal. I guess to take advantage of the same mold for a bunch of things. It was just cheaper to do it that way, to make that kind of part of the universal Garmont Scafo mold. Anyway, Bobby saw that and said, wow, that's cool. That means, the concept is proven. It's strong enough to be able to bolt that duck butt onto a boot and it'll stay there. So he just did a little 3D modeling and made a generic duck butt His was rectangular in shape for the mounting platform, 4 holes, as opposed to triangular in 3 holes, which is what Garmont adopted. And so you can get them at shapeways.com. Search for the Michael Bolton duck butt, and they're like $20 a piece. And you can say, well, that's kind of expensive. Well, you know what? If you're trying to convert a pair of boots to be NTN compatible, $40 is a pretty cheap conversion. Now, that's not including your labor.
Well, and I think you discussed this in an upcoming Dostie View, correct?
I do, but we're talking, so I'll just explain a little bit. Yeah. I mean, so I saw what Bobby had done there. And so the problem, there's 2 problems with it, but they have nothing to do with the actual bolt-on duck butt. The main problem with the bolt-on duck butt is you've got to be really careful and really precise about where you mount it and how you remove the rubber Vibram sole that has been glued to the mold of the lower part of the shell. And man, I was having a really hard time when I first did it. It was just not coming up, and I thought I could kind of like chisel it off, and like it was not budging. And then I went back and looked at his online notes, and he said, you got to heat it. And with a heat gun, I was like, oh, I don't feel like buying a heat gun. So I just...
What, are you sitting in there with a lighter? You know, like...
No. I just... all I had was a hairdryer, which I have used when I help with Backcountry Magazine for just kind of spot heating of liners, for helping people with boot fitting issues when we're doing a big ski test. And I've just found it's good enough, right? And I wasn't sure that a hairdryer would be good enough, but it was. It took about 10 minutes of heating in one spot for the glue to kind of let go. But again, the real key on this is you've got to get the position right to know exactly where you're going to place it, and that's based on the position of the back of the duck butt relative to the front of the toe of an NTN boot.
Except, and you were using an F1, right?
I was using an F1. And so the real value of the Michael Bolton duck butt is really, there's only 2 boots that it's valid with. The Scarpa's original and first 3 versions of the F1 and the F3. And the F3 also came out as a military version called the Defender. So the F1, the F3, and the Defender are the only boots that the Michael Bolton duck butt will allow you to convert. And actually, it's not really an NTN compatible boot. It's only because those boot, an F1 and an F3 will not work in an Outlaw or a Freedom or a Free Ride, even after you add the duck butt, because the dimensions on the toe are narrower than an NTN toe. Not by a huge amount, but enough that if you put a Michael Bolton duck butt in an F1 and tried to use an Outlaw, there would be side to side slop at the toe.
Yeah, that's right, because it's got like a cleaner, narrower toe where the pins are.
It's got an AT toe.
Right.
Okay, it's an Alpine Touring toe. But it's got inserts. So an F1 or an F3 with a Michael Bolton duck butt can be converted for use with a Meijo or a Lynx or a TTS. A TTS, you don't need a Michael Bolton.
Yeah, because it's got a heel.
Because you're connecting at the real heel instead of the second heel.
I feel like all these DIY mods like need to come. It's like, purchase your Michael Bolton, and here's your heat gun and your Dremel and like sandpaper, glue, screwdriver.
And I mean, the reality is, if here's the thing, the problem is there's not that many F1s or F3s on the used market. It was never a huge seller. And the people who gravitated to the F1 and the F3 initially, they were alpine touring skiers. And because they have a bellows, the original concept of the F1 was that the bellows would make a more comfortable and theoretically a more efficient uphill stride for a racing advantage. But turns out the bellows does not give you an advantage in terms of efficiency. It may give you an advantage in terms of being a more natural flexing stride, but it doesn't give you any advantage in terms of uphill efficiency, because the reality is when it comes to uphill efficiency, it's all about weight. And as soon as you put a bellows in a boot, that means you're using P-backs and you're not using the lightest weight materials possible. And since the name of the game comes down to weight, because most of the people who are racing, they're really good athletes. Okay, they're all, if they weren't on skis and they were just running, they would be within tenths of a second of each other. But with skis, then you've got this other equipment that adds into the equation. You have skinning technique, but honestly, they're all kind of in the same caliber, the same, speed range. And so what it boils down to a lot of times is weight. And so bellowed boots will never win the weight game.
There, and you heard it first.
At least not with current plastics.
Yeah.
Okay. There may be a plastic out there that's lighter weight and flexible and durable, but it's not been considered. And I don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It could exist, and it's a plastic that no one in the ski industry has ever considered because it's just so far out there.
Yeah. I did see, we've got a customer, Gary, I believe. He's put up some videos. I need to connect with him. Hopefully, I know he listens to the podcast. So, he's been modifying, Majo with regular toes and doing some stuff there. I'll have to show you some videos.
I've seen some of that. I think I've seen him. Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I've seen some of his posts.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like it's kind of got the Majo back part, the second heel connection, but more with like an outlaw toe, which I kind of think that's honestly. I think if you can melt a lot of the features, that's always what I would like to see with like the DIY, or honestly, see someone actually produce it. Is maybe even a non-touring outlaw-esque type binding that's got the features of Majo in terms of releasability, springs, all that stuff, which is what he did. It's got that back end, but it's just a regular, toe. Which
it's
no one's done it.
Which means TX comps could be in a Majo then. Correct.
Yep. And I think it'd be really cool if you could see, one thing I like about Rotofella, even though it's sort of outdated, is I do like their, the plastic that they use for the flex plate better. I think it's, Majo's durable, but I've always liked that white, plastic that, Rotofella has used. I just think the flex seems more natural, but, I don't know what the difference is. I'm not a composites guy, but it's always kind of interesting to see that stuff.
No, I think what you're pointing out is there is some flex in that in the second heel attachment plate, I'll call it, that is not in the Meijo. The Meijo plate is stiff in the housing that the springs are contained in, and it flexes in front of that, but not within that plate.
Yeah,
and the Rotafella plate has some give, so it does flex a little bit. The pivot point of the cables of the spring tension is much further forward than a Meijo.
Yeah, way further forward.
Way further forward, and it has metal at the back of the plate. It's a metal hook that hooks onto the duck butt with some plastic wings, and so I think it makes the free ride more durable, at least on the flex plate.
Yep, and free ride's still a good binding. When you brought up the where the pivot point is, it wasn't until we started seeing Outlaw and the fixed point of pivot in that flex zone that's when it really occurred to me why everyone thought you'd hear early on when the free ride was out, and even the Freedom, people would always be like, it feels like you're on your tippy toes. And really, I never understood that until later on when Outlaw came out and Meijo, and I was like, oh, that's totally why. Is like, it's pulling at the second heel, but where the cable's catching is literally at your toe. So you had this completely kind of odd sensation, I think, with that NTN binding, but there was nothing to compare it to. So it was like, yeah, I don't know, like maybe it seemed like it wasn't possible to be tippy toe from when you look at it, but now from the engineering perspective, it makes a lot more sense now.
Well, yeah, and you see, that was the first NTN binding, so there was nothing else to compare it to. And we already understood that the further back where the tension originated from along the length of the binding, the further back it is, the more active it is. We learned that with the Hammerhead. Well, we actually learned it with the Super Loop, because the Super Loop was the first telebinding that had an adjustable pivot, but it wasn't that dramatic. I mean, you could notice it, but it wasn't like a Hammerhead was.
No, Russell Rainey, literally visionary. Like with that stuff, it's funny that you brought that up, because I brought that up in last week's podcast with for some reason I was talking about pivot position, and I brought that up, and I teased it. I am still talking to Russell. He said he'll do the podcast. So one of these days we're gonna get the scoop on how he came up with that, because case in point, in terms of the pivot point adjustment, most people have I literally helped someone today, and we identified, she's like, I don't know, I just started telemarking last year, I don't know which binding I had. We figured out it was Hammerhead, and then I showed her the pivot point stuff, and she was like mind blown. She's like, really? Like, I had no idea. And it's so funny, because I've seen that so many times where someone purchases a Hammerhead used, or this one was given to her by her father, and it's like whatever position it was on when they got it is what they were using, so it's really and I think about that with Super Loop too. And Rainey's I can't wait to talk to him about that, because it's so ahead of its time that I don't even think people knew what it meant, and now you're seeing iterations of it now. But I mean, I know when Hammerhead came out, I mean, I was skiing on I bought a binding. I was skiing a lot of Volley 3-pin hardwires back then, and you got the binding, that was the pivot point. There was no way to switch it with a slick pin, or like the Hammerhead had the little sliding adjustments on it to do that. But very ahead of its time. Super cool.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, the only other way I mean, you couldn't adjust the origination of that tension vector where it started from. All you could adjust was the tension. You could tighten up the tension on the springs.
Yeah.
And that was, and so Russell introduced the idea of being able to move that back, and then he made it aggro with the hammerhead, and then everyone was like, well, of course you want to do that, duh. And so now, when TTS came out, Mark Lingell gave that capability. So in the NTN world, TTS was the first Telemark binding to work with NTN boots that gave you an adjustable pivot on the cable. But it was adjusting at it was connecting at the real heel, not at the second heel. And with Meijo and Lynx and Outlaw, that pivot point is not adjustable, but it's aggressive enough. And this is the thing that I learned with TTS. You could adjust that pivot location based on the standard mounting position from basically 40 millimeters back from the pins on the toe, on the tech toe, to 70. So it would be like, I think it was like 45, 60, and 75. Those are the basic positions. And what I found very quickly is most people, they either like the 60 millimeter position or the 45, depending upon whether they wanted active or more neutral. But the reality is what they really wanted was something in between, which I found out for myself. I moved Lingell's recommended position forward so that my most aggressive position would be like 65 or 70, and then the middle position would be 55, and the forward position would be like 40. And I thought that was the best, and I ended up going with the middle position, which was 55. Well, guess what? Meijo is, I think, 53 millimeters behind the tech toe pins. And Lynx is different because the mechanism of how it flexes, it's using that flex plate, that composite flex plate, which acts like a leaf spring. But those pivot positions are like 50, 55, and 60. And the Outlaw is effectively like 52. So it's kind of like it's the de facto standard position that most people like. And then they just adjust the tension on the springs.
Well, Lynx to, you actually, it's funny that you said this because you lumped in Outlaw, Meijo, and Lynx. Technically, Lynx has a slick pin with adjustable pivot, but I don't think it actually does a whole lot.
No, exactly my point. It's not quite the same.
No.
Because it's a leaf spring that's in action, it's not that there aren't compression springs, but the dominant factor at the initiation of the turn is the leaf spring.
Yeah.
And so, you can adjust that slick pin, but it's not the same as if you could adjust the Meijo, you would see more dramatic differences. It's not adjustable except by spring tension. Okay. But if you could adjust the Meijo as much as you can adjust the Lynx on the slick pin, you would notice dramatic differences.
Yeah. I don't, and that was the point I was going to make is don't you think it's kind of fascinating that you point out Lingell latched on to Rainey's concept of pivot and activeness versus neutral. You're how neutral the binding is where the pivot point is. And like you said, I agree. There's a sweet spot because if you mount that most aggressive, like 70 plus back from the pins on like a TTS, it's almost like you can't even lift your heel, which it's really hard. Yeah. But it's fascinating that nobody has made a binding taking into account something that Rainey came up with in the late 90s, early 2000s, I guess, like with the hammerhead.
Late 90s, yeah.
I mean, 5 positions, and no one has incorporated that into an NTN model yet with that much range. And you actually hit me up because I did that video on YouTube the other day, and oh boy, some of the comments, it is so funny. And granted, I sort of made the headline sort of like Telemark skiers are cheap, and so but I was kind of and honestly the title of sort of the thumbnail for the video was actually from people. It was from the responses that people had given to Telly Tay's video talking about if your G3 Targa breaks, you should switch to like a switchback, for instance. And people were just talking about not wanting to spend money, and that's why there's no R&D. And I was sort of giving this rebuttal about, actually, I think people want to spend money. There's just not in a lot of cases, there's no product that fits the Targa or whatever gear, debate we want to go down that rabbit hole. It's like, I just think there's not enough variety. And this is exactly what I was kind of getting at is I really think it's not about NTN versus 75 millimeter like everybody tries to make it out. It's like if you took position 1 or 2, for instance, on a hammerhead and incorporated that on an Outlaw, for instance, or a Majo, it's actually more neutral than that 50 millimeter measurement you're talking. The sweet spot for a lot of us is in 50, but I would argue like when you're skiing a Targa, it's like what? I mean, 20 or 30 or I don't know the measurement.
Yeah,
but
yeah. It depends, but yeah, it would be 40 millimeters or less.
Yeah, so
or less.
So it's like I'm so surprised that no one has even incorporated that ability. I mean, that would solve like so many of these debates. Is the point isn't that Targa is a good or bad binding, or that you're not spending money and upgrading. So many people got kind of rubbed the wrong way with that, as though I was saying, no, you just need to upgrade. And granted, there was some people that sort of like went back and forth on the YouTube and the Facebook comments, and they're like, you just need to upgrade your binding, And I'm like, no, that's not the point. Like they like the way the Targa feels, and the pivot point is literally the issue in most of these cases. I mean, even if the spring is stiff, if you could make it more neutral, I think that's the thing,
That's the dominant factor. That's what Hammerhead made clear, that the pivot location of the spring tension attached to the boot, whether it's the heel or the second heel, is what dominates the Telemark sensation. Although it's different with the second heel, okay? But for sure, with a 75 millimeter boot, the pivot location is a very strong component to how active the binding feels. But the other thing that's embedded in 75 millimeter is the flex of the sole as initiated through the duck bill. And that's one thing that NTN now, with the various options that you have, because the reality is with the 75 millimeter bindings, I mean, most of them skied the same. The power you felt with a Targa versus a super loop was almost insignificant. It's indistinguishable. Okay, if you couldn't see it, if someone attached a Targa on one foot and a super loop on the other foot and covered it up and you couldn't see it, you probably couldn't tell the difference. Okay, the only way you could tell the difference between a super loop and a Targa was how easily the super loop tended to rip out of skis. But that's because of Russell. He built on the 3-hole 3-pin standard mounting pattern that Rodafella had standardized, and he added 2 holes. And it wasn't enough surface area to hold the toe to the ski with plastic boots. It was insignificant. It was insufficient. And the Targa had a bigger surface area, and it stopped ripping out of skis. And that is why Targa became the number one selling binding, because retailers didn't have to warranty a pair of skis potentially if they sold it with a Targa, but if they sold it with a Super Loop, they might. So they stopped pushing Super Loop and they pushed Targa because it saved them money.
Yeah, and then go ahead, keep going.
And they skied more or less the same.
And no, I was gonna say is, again, Rainey comes up with the 6-hole pattern on the Hammerhead, which in my opinion is essentially the standard at this point. It's standard 6-hole. You know, you look at every, well, minus Majo, which is kind of a ridiculous hole pattern because it's like 13 screws per binding. But I think, honestly, in the future there's a good argument that the standard will become a 6-hole pattern, because if you look at all the 22 bindings and Bishop all use 6-hole now, and you know, really the only bindings that haven't gone that direction are all the volet bindings, and honestly those could move to a 6-hole if they just changed the riser. No,
it's moving to an 8-hole.
8-hole pattern? What?
8-hole. So here's the thing. I mean, you're absolutely correct. I agree with you that the Hammerhead mounting pattern is strong enough for any Telemark binding to keep it mounted to the ski, as long as the ski has strong enough material in the mounting zone.
Yeah, not Polonia. FYI.
A lot of the super light skis do not have that. Okay, but aside from that, it's a strong mounting pattern, Pierre came up with what he came up with because that's how his toe piece works, and so I understand what he did. And I mean, you could, in hindsight, it would have been great if he'd come up with a 6-hole pattern that was compatible with Outlaw. But I think the bottom line is, I don't think there's going to be any standard pattern, because what happens, it's the Targa phenomenon. Okay, if you get introduced to telemarking on a Targa, then we all do this, and people like you and me who have the opportunity to and kind of the requirement to ski all different kinds of equipment, okay, we want a standard mounting pattern. But the average person, they buy one binding, they learn how to telemark with it, they adapt their style to that combination of boot and binding, and they don't want to have to adjust it ever again. They just want to get new boots and keep using their Targa. Well, the Targa is prone to the cable breaking, and so if you've thrown your hat in the Targa camp, eventually you're going to be disappointed, and you are going to have to change.
because of the parts. That's what we're getting at.
Yeah,
it's not
because of the parts.
Not because we were Targa haters. It's just you're gonna now. Right. That was how this all started, which was like, hey, we don't actually want you to. I mean, we were at a shop in Colorado the other day. We were joking around because Taylor and I were there, and we were like, hey, we should see how much they could sell a Targa cable for, because it's kind of become a joke, like. How much are these? I mean, if you find a mint Targa cable, like we had a mint pair come in today, never been skied, and it kind of brought this up too. This shop, they sold one cable recently for $50, a mint cable, brand new. Which, I mean, and I guess kind of to like wrap that concept up. Is I honestly believe that if you look over the history of all this stuff we're talking about, we've always been in search of spring options as though that was what was changing it. Because even if you look at Target, you had 3 spring options, and you had, I mean, every binding subsequently, you know, you basically had a way to stiffen the spring, including Hammerhead, but Hammerhead offered 5 pivot positions, giving the most variety. But even if you look at 01, 02, you know, you had free flex, mid stiff, rid stiff. You know, you look at Volet, I've talked about that on the podcast. I mean, you could get like an X2 spring, but it's really the pivot point that changes on the X2 versus the switchback. And I think that's what's so fascinating to me is now it's like in NTN, in a lot of these, most of the examples minus TTS that we're talking about, is it's all spring options, which is awesome. You know, we talked about Majo a bunch over the last couple weeks in videos and stuff. You know, you've got all these different spring options, red line springs, stock springs, little spring inside of the stock spring, yada, yada, yada. I mean, you could go on and on, but you still don't have the pivot point change, which is, it just blows my mind, because I just think we wouldn't even be having this discussion if you had a Majo or even Outlaw. If you had an Outlaw with 5 pivot positions, game over, you know, like, not game over. I shouldn't say that. It'll keep going on. But I mean, think about that. If you had position 1 and 2 of a Hammerhead on an Outlaw, I don't think the Target person would have as hard a time switching. I don't. Because it's not the spring that's the problem, but people think of stiffness as all of that, but it's stiffness and activity or neutrality mixed together, but people use one word for both, the combination of those two, you know?
Yeah. And here's the thing. People use the term activity or whatever term they use. It doesn't even matter, okay? It's a combination of things. And so it's the flex of the boot, the sole flex of the boot, and the pivot location, and the spring rate of the springs. And then are you attached midsole or real heel? And is it a duckbill or is it NTN? And so all those things contribute. And the other part of this, of course, is that everyone, I mean, when you look at proficient telemark skiers, they all look on first level, so someone who's not a telemarker themselves, they can look at telemark skiers and, oh yeah, that's one of those guys doing one of those curtsy turns. And but they don't really see much difference. Okay, you and I, we've been doing this a long time. We can look at different skiers and we can tell right away, oh, he skis more like this and he skis more like that. And what we know is the difference in everybody's style is totally unique, and it's based on these, you know, multiple combinations of the type of boot, the type of binding that they're in, what's their experience level. All these things contribute to the sensation of the telemark turn, and that's what telemarkers love, is the sensation of the turn. But everyone's sensation, even though it's telemark, even though it's dropping knee, even though it's weighting your rear foot, the way you telemark is different from the way that I telemark, is different from the way that Tay telemarks, is different from the way Malik, you know, I mean, all these people, right? Everyone telemarks, but they all telemark a little bit different. And that difference is why, you know, the people who've been skiing on targets is like, no, this is the way I tell you. I don't want to change that. Yeah. Or I haven't tried anything else that is the same. I mean, I remember I was one of the most, I'm a big fan of telemark, and I promoted the heck out of it, right, through the pages of Cool War. But when the Terminator first showed up, I hated it because it was too stiff. And because my technique was wedded to a leather boot. And so I had to change my technique to be able to do a telemark turn in a way that was satisfying to me with plastic boots. And so it took me like 2 or 3 years before I made the switch. And once I did, then yes, I had to change my technique. But it was, to me, it was worth the adaptation because of the improvement in lateral edging control that I got with plastic boots. And then I had to do the same thing with NTN. I mean, when I first tested NTN, the prototype NTN binding and boot was, I mean, it was a really good combination. And so I was pretty psyched about it. And I wrote up a nice review. And then when it actually came out, it was not what was tested. So,
classic.
Right. So everything I said about it wasn't true.
Did they, that's an interesting point. Did they change the boot to be that really stiff orange plastic? Was that the change that threw you off?
Well, that was, see, so it was two things going on at once. Okay. Number one, so what was noticed in the prototype is you could get toe crunch in the boot. And so, and that was just the prototype. So the world didn't know about that. Right. So what Scarpa did between saying, okay, we're going forward with this and actually coming out with it is they stiffened up the bellows so that you couldn't crunch your toe. And then Rotafella added a stiffer set of springs. So if you will, instead of having grade 1, 2, 3, they came out with 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 being the stiffest, and they didn't call them 1, 2, 3, 4. I just don't remember the colors. I think it was white, green, blue,
red, and there was actually a black.
You're right, and a black, right. So anyway,
yep.
So when they came out with it, it was really hard to get the boot to break, to flex at the bellows and to bend. So it was really hard to make a telemark turn. And it was kind of like the difference between leather and plastic, but it was going from, all right, now we've adapted to plastic, but now this is like way too stiff. And so then I think Scarpa moderated the bellows so they were more flexible, and Rotafella got rid of the black super stiff springs. And everyone figured it out, and they adapted, and like, I had a hard time adapting to NTN, and it wasn't until Mitch Weber invited me to come and learn how to ski NTN, and I was really kind of insulted, but I took it as a friendly, hey, just come on down and let's hang out together, and let's put our competitive personalities aside, and let's just ski together. And you need to ski NTN, and I'll set you up on a rig that you'll like. And he was right. And for me, the problem was the NTN had so much more power than what I was used to on the width ski that I was used to, which was 85 millimeters at the waist, which I thought was fat enough. I don't need to go any fatter.
Wow, really going out there.
Yeah, well, but that's
for that
that's
time,
where I was
get
at.
it. Yeah, I get it from that
Right.
time period.
And see, and here's the thing: when I'm giving you my testimony on this, notice that at every step of the way, I'm like, no, I don't want to upgrade. No, I don't want to upgrade. But it's my job to review this. I couldn't figure. I was reluctant to figure it out.
I might have lost you there for a sec. You're reluctant to figure it out.
Yeah. So anyway, the main difference is I go up there and I'm skiing with Mitch, and he put me on fat skis, like 95 or 100 millimeters the waist, which for me was huge. And it's not my kind of standard width size, but what it did is it moderated the power, or it dissipated the power that was available with NTN. And I was overpowering my skinnier skis. And with a fatter ski, it was distributed. And I was like, oh, okay. I can deal with this. And now I have a tool, I have something that's powerful enough to drive a fat ski. And part of the reason I thought 85 millimeters was as fat as I needed to go is I was driving with 75 millimeter equipment with T2s. And yeah, I can drive 110 wasted ski with T2s and a switchback, but it takes a lot more effort than it does with a Lynx and a TX.
This kind of what's interesting to me is and from these comments this past week, I can see in the comments similar to what you're saying. Like there's a resistance to change, and I totally understand that. And I think what's tough for me is I see all of the elements within different types of bindings that are out there or have existed. Like I was saying, hammerhead, pivot points, different spring options. I feel like if we could melt all of those features into a binding and give the ability to, because I feel like I look at hammerhead and I'm thinking, okay, like that has multiple spring options. Back then it was stiffy or stock spring, 5 pivot positions. Like I look at that and that was we're talking almost 20 years ago that binding was made. And I don't see those features being incorporated into an NTM binding, which for me, I think the springs are there. There's some releasability features that are really cool, especially with Majo. But you don't see them all in one. And I honestly think that that's such a big thing, because I don't actually, I think you could address the resistance of change by not asking people to change at all. If anything, they're going to change is just changing like the pivot point, which I think is the biggest thing. And then I agree with the boot flex. You need some options there, but it seems like it's like I had a gentleman come in today talking to him, and it was so funny because we got talking about Volet plates, the original Volet plate, like Wally's,
with the bungees on the heel.
Yeah, Wally's very first. I found that out that was actually his very first product, was the plastic plate that went from a existing 3-pin binding and that had the bungee heel. But what this guy brought up was an interesting point that kind of plays into this. So he was skiing super comps at the time, and he's like, "Oh, that's funny. Yeah, like I remember that binding, but you know what we used to use those for? We would put them inside of our boots to stiffen the boot." And I was like, "Oh, interesting." So like they would take the insole out and they would actually put that plastic,
that flex plate in there to stiffen up the flex of the boot,
the lateral stiffness. And I was like, oh, and as we're talking, I'm thinking, it's not like, I mean, the super comp, we're talking like late 80s, and it's like, I haven't seen anything like that. I mean, I've heard talk of it over the years, like what if you could modify the stiffness of the boot sole, but by way of insert rather than like, you have your stock sole and then like you insert it inside of the boot. And I was like, I just think it's like, I just haven't seen like all of these combinations in one product. And I just think, man, all of them are there. And I feel like we wouldn't have to ask people such a hard ask. Like you and I could try a bunch of different bindings and go, all right, I'm going to settle on this one. Whereas I think the features are there to be able to offer it to the general public. That's like you said, they want a binding that it's on their ski. They don't adjust it, and they're set to jet, which I think is more realistic than asking people to make that change when there's dollars involved. I think that's where it gets tricky, is you're like, and then we end up in these camps like NTN versus 75. And it's like, actually, I think, again, how we fasten to the ski It's just a matter of having all the abilities to modify to your needs so you don't have to deal with it. And
I think a big part is people don't want to. Most people are not really mechanically inclined. They just want to telly. They just want to ski, right? They kind of want to be like their Alpine friends and just go click, click, and then they ski, right? It's just about your technique.
Deep down inside, that's who I am. I'm not the gear guy. I'm not. That's just the gist of it. Like you get it and you're like, okay, here we go. And it's there. I hope that the next wave of binding innovation considers everything that's there, because it literally, it's all the pieces are there, but they're in different brands. They're not like in one thing.
Well, and I think we're going to get there actually when Valet comes out with their TTS, because I think for a lot of people, TTS, at least in the NTN realm, okay, an NTN format boot, all right. And this is just change, and people we're reluctant to embrace change because we're comfortable where we're at. Like, I can tally fine on my Targas. What's the problem? Why do I have to upgrade? Well, because the Targas, they don't make them anymore. You can't even get the parts, and there's a limit to what models of boots are available anymore. And you and I both know this, where I'm repeating this, you cannot exactly mimic a Targa or a 3-pin. For sure, you can't even mimic a 3-pin with anything NTN. Okay, so, but you can get close to the Targa sensation with the right combination of spring adjustment and the boot you choose, things like that. It's not exact. And, for some people, they don't like the forced change. And I get it. I think that for the majority of people, and you know this from talking to satisfied customers, the majority of people who have made the switch, they grumbled when they had to make the switch. And I'm guessing about half of them, when they first, made the switch, it took them a little while to adapt. So they weren't too psyched about it. But they did eventually adapt. And once they adapted, they're like, oh, yeah, this is absolutely the way to go because it is better. I am skiing better, things like that. But, to be forced to make changes on a technique that you had to work a long time to figure out, it's like, I don't want to have to go back to start all over. And so I understand that. But you and I both know there's benefits to what's available to NTN. I mean, there's de-inefficient touring. If you want to go backcountry, if you get a Lynx or a Meja or a TTS, 3-pin doesn't hold a candle to that, okay, in terms of uphill efficiency. And then there's much better lateral control, much better torsional rigidity, much better edging when you're skiing. So that's a major benefit. And then the flex, I mean, it is different than 75 millimeter. I've made the switch. I'm fully adapted, and at this point now, that's what I prefer, what I know, and so I'm reluctant to go back to 75 millimeter because I would have to change my technique again.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a good one to wrap up. Dude, we went deep on the bindings. There you go.
Yeah.
No, but
much.
No, I think it's good. And I think just to wrap it up, like if any of the DIYers are listening, look at the history. Learn from the history, because I would love to see someone try to take a stab at those items. Like look, and honestly, shout out to Russell Rainey. Look at Rainey. I think that guy had some incredibly, I still think people don't get what is there in the Hammerhead and the Super Loop, like conceptually. And if we can incorporate that into a future binding. And
Well,
all I'll say is, I know you're a TTS fan, but if you can get the step in and add that stuff, bingo. Because
no, I agree with that. The step in is nice. The step in on a Lynx, the step in on a Mesa, or the step in on an Outlaw, love it. And even though the free ride isn't so step in, I got to say this for the free ride, it's the most reliable, best releasing NTN binding out there based on results. But now I'm going to plant a seed for our next talk, because we talked before we turned on the mic, but on the recording, that we were going to get there. But so I'll just plant a seed for the next one. So there, you were talking about, I wish there were some way to adjust the flex on the boot. Well, it was done once upon a time with the Asolo.
With the Telebreeze?
With the Telebreeze. And
I thought about that when I said that, because I was like, I think he had told me about this at some point.
Yeah.
Plant the seed.
Yeah, it's just interesting that some of the things that we're wrestling with were attempted and addressed once before. It's just the final form. Well, unfortunately, those boots blew up. But it was a fantastic prototype concept, and it did have an adjustable forward flex.
In the hinge?
In the boot, no. There was a bar. So that toe plate, remember that was the problem, that the toe bolted on to the frame of the boot, and that bolt let go.
Yeah, for those that don't know what we're talking about, like think plastic Telemark boot with no bellows, but like a door hinge toe. That's basically what it is.
Yeah, and what it had was a metal spring under the toe that provided the resistance. And you could change that metal spring. It's a leaf spring, like the Lynx, inside a boot.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good seed to plant, because I think, we'll let's do that next time, and we kind of deep dived into this, and I love because you're super, like, finger on the pulse, like I said, with sort of that DIY crowd, and I love seeing what's going on, because we obviously don't have enough brands that are just like pumping out brand new stuff. But I'd love to see, what's cool is these guys that are pumping out these DIY projects, they're willing to let people see it, and but they're taking the risk on a prototype that's not, I think that's what's kind of cool and innovative, is they're excited to show it to other people because they're doing it for fun. And I think that's what's so cool. And, I think, if they take into account, someone out there just take into account, some of these things we're talking about, be cool to see what they could come up with.
Yeah. And I think that same innovative spirit needs to infect the boot world, but that is a future discussion.
All right, brother. Well, that was good. That was some fun history, and also I think a good way to tie in a bunch of stuff that's been there along the way, but maybe has been forgotten. So, Hey, thanks for being here, man. I always love catching up with you. It's a blast just letting us, and thanks to the listeners out there for letting us ramble on and hopefully bring up some fun points that they can chew on.
Absolutely. Tally-ho. Spread Telemark.
Spread Telemark, brother. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Woo! Always like catching up with Craig. We always get in these deep dive conversations, and hopefully that was interesting to all of you out there. If anything, I think conversations like this about specific aspects of the equipment and just sort of letting our brain flow sort of be recorded and talking about it gets your wheels turning. And kind of as I mentioned in the podcast is, I really have never considered myself sort of the gear nut that some people are. Probably a lot of how I started out telemark skiing. I kind of had what I had. I used it and I figured it out and I made it work in the best way possible, and kind of just relied on my technique to kind of get me through it. Obviously, as the years have gone on, I've got more access to equipment, and super grateful for that, because I think it's helped open up my perspective on a lot of things. And obviously being in the position of owning Freeheel Life and working in a retail environment, I think we've had the unique privilege of getting to know so many of you out there and get to hear and understand a lot about what's actually happening on the front lines, as a user of bindings and boots and skis. And that's been super important to me. It's really helped shape my philosophy and my ideas and our brand of Telemark in the Freeheel Life world. And I've really been trying to lean into that a little bit more in the podcast and the videos that we are putting out, so that we can share a lot of that sort of firsthand data with all of you. Because I think in some ways it's it's going to help us move and grow. And maybe somebody out there decides they don't want to just tinker any longer, but maybe they want to get into the space and start making things. And I would love to see that. Always a proponent of building our own industry. It's a small one. It's small comparatively, right, in terms of business, but it's doable for small businesses to get into. It's definitely at a level where it's more mom and pop and has the ability to stay independent. And I think independent understanding of business within Telemark specifically is really such an important aspect of this whole thing moving forward, so that we can get what we need. And that's kind of what I've been hitting on the last couple weeks in the content that I'm putting out. So I really appreciate all of you listening this fine Monday morning, and love being here, love talking about it. Really excited to get on some snow here sooner than later, and start walking around and start getting my feet under me. So in the meantime, sign up for the mailing list. Usually we're putting out weekly emails from Freeheel Life on Tuesdays and Fridays, and that's a great way to stay up with what's going on. I've been really pleased in the shop the last couple days, talking to our customers and asking them if they're on our mailing list, or they just happen to say, hey, I'm on the mailing list. I've seen what's going on. I love that ability to be able to communicate with all of you out there. I know the rest of our crew does as well. And we pride ourselves in putting out good content and good service, and being able to keep you in the know about what's happening both in our world and the Telemark world at large. So thank you for signing up for that. Link is in the show notes. If you're not on our mailing list, please go check it out. If you want to keep up with me during the week, you can find me over on Instagram at Josh Nomadson, as well as on Facebook, if that's more your jam, and also the Facebook forum that we have. You can find under Freeheel Life as well. And that's a great area for conversation, sharing photos, sharing stoke, and also what other content we're putting out on our platforms like our YouTube channel and whatnot. So thank you for being here. I can't wait to be back here next Monday with another episode. And until next week, friends and family, spread Telemark always.